I would like to welcome everyone to the 34th day of the session, Tuesday, February 28th, 2023. Today in history, February 28th, 1885, F.E. Warren is confirmed as the territorial governor. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Convening roll call for the 34th day, Tuesday, February 28th, 2023. Alamand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Angelos. Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Plouston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Warnock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Northrup?
Excuse.
Oakley?
Excuse.
Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez-Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Swanser Dan? Swanser Dave? Speaker Summers?
Here.
Oakley?
Chief, maybe we ought to leave that roll open a little bit. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome Representative Angelos to do our prayer of the day. Please rise.
Father God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for one more day in your beauty and in your servanthood to the people of Wyoming. We thank you for the sun shining. We thank you for every person that walked through those doors today. And we just pray your anointing, your wisdom to fall on them. We pray for peace to fall over the chamber, peace over both chambers. We thank you so much that we have this opportunity, and we ask that we would serve you to the best of our ability and to serve our constituents. And in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Representative Angelos. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The House will please come to order. We have a couple of privileges, and then we have a special event. We need to finish roll call as well. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Northrup? Rodriguez Williams?
She is here.
62 present.
Thank you. Representative Smith, do you have a privilege?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Privilege, please.
Please.
All righty. In the West Gallery up here is one of my good friends. He is the president of Eastern Wyoming College. This is Dr. Jeff Hawes. Please welcome him to the House.
Hey! Welcome to the House, Eastern Wyoming College. Representative Ottman, do you have a privilege of the floor?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, privilege of the floor.
Please.
Today is a very special day. One of the, I don't want to say landmarks or whatever, but one of our senior legislators is having a birthday today, and we just want to let him know that we appreciate all of his hard work and wish him a very happy birthday. Lloyd Larson.
Hey! Hey! Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday, dear Lloyd. Well, I think we're actually getting our voice on that song. Representative Rodriguez Williams, do you have a privilege? No. Representative Harrelson, do you have a privilege?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Privilege of the floor.
Please.
As an interim topic, can we discuss who's going to be leading that song from the mic for next session?
That might be a good idea, Representative Henderson. Good point of order, actually, I think.
Thank you. Because I don't know if I could do another year of this.
Representative Western, privilege?
Privilege of the floor, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
Folks, so we've got some of my constituents from Sheridan County in Leadership Sheridan here in our West Gallery. So if you would please rise and give them a round of applause. They are our future leaders. Thank you for coming to the People's House.
Welcome, Leadership Sheridan. Welcome to the House. Chairman Newsom, do you have a privilege of the floor?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Privilege.
Please.
Thank you. Up in our North Gallery is my friend Amy Law and her group. Go ahead and stand up. And all those folks with homeschool children.
Hey! Welcome to the House. Anybody else have a privilege? This morning, we have a special performance by Cheyenne South High School's cheerleading squad. The group will be performing a Wyoming cheer. The Bison's head coach is Madeline Mote, Representative Henderson's granddaughter, and the assistant coaches are Kirsten Beltran and Juliana Emmett. Kirsten is the daughter-in-law of Representative Trujillo. Representative Henderson, would you like to say a few words? Would you like a privilege of the floor?
Privilege, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the school opened in 2010, they have won 15 4A state championships. Most recently, the Bison squad finished second in the small game non-tumbling division at the UCA Colorado Regional Tournament in November, earning them a spot to compete at the UCA Nationals earlier this month in Orlando, Florida. They finished 18th out of 40 teams participating, making Wyoming residents proud. Representatives, it is a privilege. Please help me welcome these talented students to the People's House. Go Wild! Go Wild! Go Wild! Yay! Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yay! Thank you, Bisons, for joining us today and sharing your wonderful talents with us. We wish you continued success. You know, after last night, we need a little rejuvenation, a little energy in the body, so hats off to those folks. That was great. With that, Journal Committee report.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of February 27th, 2023 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Chestick and Ward.
We are now at that order of business of request to concur with Senate amendments to House bills. The first message for our consideration is message number 359 on House Bill 22, Chairman Eklund, I believe, or Crago, one of the two. I kind of have a Chairman Eklund.
Mr. Speaker, your Joint Conference Committee report on House Bill 22 has...
Chairman Eklund, are you going to move that? You'll
I'm
need to
sorry.
move that
I
Joint Conference
will
Committee.
start that way. And I would move Joint Conference Committee report on message 359 to House Bill 22 and would ask for an aye vote on this. It looks like quite a bit. If you look at your conference committee report, what this has in it is probably everything that both houses wanted. I believe that this is the best way to get a product done, is to come to the table and chew it up and spit it out and chew it up and spit it out. And that's what both houses did. And I think we got a product that even I can read. So I would ask for an aye vote on this committee report. It's similar to when we brought this was an interim topic bill. It's maybe one of the most important bills I can remember bringing from state lands since I've been here. So I'd ask for an aye vote.
We are voting on the motion to concur with Senate amendments to House Bill 22. A majority of the elected members is required. The chief clerk will please accept this is a conference committee report. So I need to make sure I get the right language on this. We're voting on Joint Conference Committee Report number 1 to House Bill 22. A majority of the elected members is required to adopt the report. The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Ellenman? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Clauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez-Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washit? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanzer Dan? Zwanzer Dave? Speaker Summers? 61 aye, 1 excused.
By your vote, you have voted to adopt Joint Conference Committee Report number 1 on House Bill 22. We are at that order of business of bills on second reading. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 72.
Senate File 72, sponsored by Senator Larson. Employees forced microchip implantation prohibited, an act relating to labor and employment.
We have amendments. Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 72. I encourage your favorable consideration. Pretty straightforward amendment here. All we're simply saying is that if you are going to do this as an employer and the employee does consent, that you need to comply with the federal regs that regulate RFID technology, which is radio frequency identification technology, which is generally what most folks use when it comes to these type of circumstances. And we're just making sure that we're federally compliant. So please vote aye.
Question having been called, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 72 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 72 has been adopted. We are now on second reading amendment number 2, Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 72 and ask for your favorable consideration. Members, this is the same committee of the whole amendment that I ran yesterday, and we didn't have all the members here, so I just wanted to reiterate what exactly this amendment does. Again, members, this is about implantation of microchips. However, it also has these requirements if both the employee and the employer voluntarily agree to implant a microchip. All these requirements seem to be unnecessary to me. I don't know why we would create these restrictions if a business and an employee choose to do it, right? So, for example, we have our ID cards. If the state of Wyoming optionally chose to grant us access via implanted microchips, I don't know why we would want to get in the way of any business deciding to do that voluntarily and not as a condition of employment. So again, I ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Locke for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm on and against the amendment again. As we discussed yesterday, the issue with this amendment is some of these protections that are put in place are ensuring that if the employee does this voluntarily, that there will be appropriate level of written consent. There will be an option for microchip removal, and full disclosure of how the data is being used for the employee. So the microchip, as we mentioned yesterday, these microchips have the potential to do a lot of different things, tracking and even collect other data. And so one of the items in this that would be completely deleted here is full disclosure of all of that information to an employee who's electing to get this microchip, but it requires that what data is maintained, how it is maintained, all of that would be removed from this bill, and I don't think that's good. I think the right answer is to ensure that if a person does choose to do it, that all the information is fully disclosed. Again, on and against this amendment.
Representative Pinn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against this amendment, the bill deals with prohibition of forced involuntary chip implantation. It fully allows for voluntary implantation. This creates a lot of unnecessary things in this bill, and I don't think we need it. Against. Thank you.
Representative Ward for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm on and against this amendment. It guts the bill. Please vote no.
Representative Knapp for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment. We have similar things when you do banking, especially digitally, and you sign a voluntary waiver to get on their data collection system, but there's sideboards to that. And I believe this just includes sideboards to this implementation.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Yin for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, members, this is only for the voluntary portion of the bill. It doesn't touch the involuntary portion. I didn't know that the state of Wyoming is one where it wants to regulate businesses unnecessarily when two parties are agreeing to do something together. So again, to ensure the freedoms of both the people who are doing this as well as the employer themselves when everyone is consenting to this, I would ask you to vote aye on the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All those in favor of second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 72 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 72 has failed. Division having been called, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 2, please rise. Stand still out there. Thank you. All those opposed, please rise. Thank you. Second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 72 has failed. 2833. Senate File 72 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 76.
Senate File 76, sponsored by Blockchain, Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act, an act relating to digital assets.
Senate File 76 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Representative Harrelson, do you have a privilege of the floor?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker. Privilege of the floor.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So up in our West Gallery, we have a group of students here with TeenPact. And to give you a little bit of background, 2003, I stood where they stood as a student watching the legislature of the state of Wyoming. 2003, 2004. TeenPact is an organization that takes students, high school students, giving them the opportunity to be introduced to the legislative process and get to do a 4-day in-depth class where they get to see how a bill moves through the House, the Senate, to the governor, as well as how the election process works and the role of government. So if you guys, I guess they've now shifted and they're over here on my right in our North Gallery, but if we could give them a round of applause, there's 46 total, not all up here, but 46 total in the state.
Well, welcome to the House. Civics and Political Science. Good endeavors. You should have been here last night at about 8 o'clock. Not sure you'd be so excited, but we really appreciate you coming, and it's great that you guys are taking up this endeavor and tracking a bill. It really helps show you what the process is and how good the process is. So thank you. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 94.
Senate File 94, sponsored by Senator Ellis, Federal Indian Child Welfare Act codification, an act relating to domestic relations.
Senate File 94 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 99.
Senate File 99, sponsored by Senator Barlow, witnessing of wills, remote methods, an act relating to wills.
Senate File 99 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 101.
Senate File 101, sponsored by Senator Ide, Wyoming Legal Tender Act amendments, an act relating to the Wyoming Legal Tender Act.
Senate File 101 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 109.
Senate File 109, sponsored by Senator Salazar, prohibiting chemical abortions, an act relating to abortions.
Senate File 109 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Just came in. All right, we have amendments. We have several amendments. All right. They keep coming in on this bill. All right. Right now, we have Representative Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 109 and ask for the body's favorable consideration. So yesterday, listening to the debate, it became clear to me and visiting with one of the sponsors here in this room that we were being really constrictive with the bill. And so what this amendment does is actually broadens the purpose of the bill, takes the description or the definition of chemical abortion drugs out of the bill, and in essence, instead of banning chemical abortion drugs, it bans the procedure. So chemical abortions will not be legal if this amendment were to pass. And so what that does is going forward, if, for example, the drugs they're using for chemical abortions change names, or tomorrow they decide, the pharmacies or manufacturers decide to change the name of the drug that they're using, this would still cover the ban that we're trying to get at. It would get us to the purpose we're trying to get at quicker, easier, and cleaner. It also probably helps the pharmacists, the physicians that use these drugs for other purposes that are legal under the bill, and they're not, it doesn't have that chilling effect, I think. And that's my intent with the amendment. I think it just makes the bill stronger and easier for us to understand going forward. And with that, I'd stand for any questions, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Representative Olson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm on and for this amendment. We've also worked through with the actual sponsor of the bill, this amendment, and he is also favorable to it. So I think, you know, there was this long debate about standing committee amendment and whether we should remove a particular drug from the list. This not only addresses that problem by removing all of the drugs from the bill, but it very specifically strengthens the bill, as the previous speaker noted, this, so that any drug now existing or in the future, if it's used for the purpose of procuring or performing an abortion on any person, that is what's prohibited by this bill. So just think that we finally, it's sometimes that's the way the process works, is you improve these bills as they move through the process. And that's exactly what this amendment does. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Haroldson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just want to say thank you guys for bringing this. It's a great opportunity for us to look at something that is probably, I use this word a lot, but policy. When we start putting the names of these certain prescriptions into our codified law, one of the issues that we can run into is tomorrow they come up with a new one. So all of a sudden, well, then the next day they'll come up with another one. And so do we continue to codify new prescriptions in to try to address this, or do we sit there and kind of whack it at the knees and say, hey, chemical abortions are not going to be allowed? And so on and for the amendment, thank you guys for working with the prime sponsor and making this happen.
Representative Jennings for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and in favor of.
Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the amendment we talked about yesterday and worked on, and really it's that paragraph A. And yesterday during the debate, I asked you to just read that over and over, and it didn't work. And it didn't say what we thought it said. And so this leaves most of paragraph A, but it makes it very clear. And then it takes these drugs out, and that, particularly that second drug that we tried to exempt, because it's used. It'll be used today across the street. And so this, I really appreciate the work, everybody, and that's what we do in here. We make bills better. And this is truly now a Wyoming bill that is written that'll fit in our statutes the right way and will be able to stand the test of time. So appreciate the good work by everybody. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question having been called, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 109 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 109 has been adopted. Senate File 109 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 120.
Senate File 120, sponsored by Senator Barlow. Restoration of Civil Rights, an act relating to crimes and criminal procedure.
We have amendments. Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 120 and ask for your favorable consideration. Members, what this amendment is a policy option for us to consider. When we look at what takes place in this law, is we prohibit nonviolent felons from possessing firearms under Wyoming law. We divest them of their rights to possess firearms. But in the bill, there's no penalty clause. Now, when we take away somebody's voting rights and then that individual votes, there's a penalty for that. There's a crime committed. So what this policy option gives us is the chance to put in a criminal sanction for those people who have their rights to possess a firearm prohibited by the state, to pay a consequence should they opt to be in possession of a firearm. So the really bad actors, when you use your imagination, picture the really bad actor who's in possession of a firearm after having been convicted of a nonviolent felony. That individual is already committing a federal felony and will be referred to federal authorities for prosecution for a felony crime. But for other individuals who may not be particularly dangerous or problematic in our society, but yet they are convicted felons and they are found to be in possession of a firearm, this option provides a misdemeanor sanction for that behavior. And it would allow Wyoming law enforcement officers who come into contact with these individuals to deal with them in the Wyoming system, rather than referring them to the federal government for prosecution for a felony crime. And I think that's very appropriate. You have somebody who was convicted of check fraud 8 years ago, and he's found to be out, in a goose blind with his 12 gauge and his grandson. Well, guess what? That's a crime. He's a convicted felon. He's not supposed to be in possession of that 12 gauge shotgun. Do we want that individual referred to federal authorities for prosecution of a federal felony? Or do we want our local law enforcement people to perhaps be able to deal with that on the misdemeanor level in the Wyoming courts? So this bill amendment has no impact on law-abiding gun owners. It applies only to those who have been convicted of a nonviolent felony. Those who are convicted of a violent felony are already covered in our statutes, and there's a felony crime for being in possession of a firearm if you're convicted of a violent felony. So this is for those people who commit crimes like burglary or drug dealing or auto theft or grand larceny. Those felony crimes that prohibit them from possessing a firearm. That's what this misdemeanor option offers us, and I offer it to the body for your consideration. And I'll take questions.
Representative Pendergraft for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for the amendment. Folks, this is a good amendment. What this does is contain offenses within the state of Wyoming so that we do not get federal law involved with it when it really doesn't need to be. We're sensitive to these are in fact felons, and we understand that these are nonviolent felons that we're working with. On and for the amendment. I like this.
Representative Hornock for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So a question on the wording here on the amendment, if the good bringer could clear this up. So it says, any person who has previously pled guilty or has been convicted of committing or attempting to commit a felony. So I'm just wondering about those two words, or attempting to commit a felony. Is attempting, can you be convicted of attempting to commit a felony in there? I'm just wondering about some clarity on that little wording. Thanks.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So under Wyoming criminal statutes, attempt is a crime. If you attempt to commit a burglary, if you attempt to steal a car, those are felony crimes. And so that's what's captured here with this language, is for those people who have attempted and been convicted. They still must be convicted of the crime. So simply attempting without the conviction is not covered in this language. But if you're convicted of attempted burglary, and that's a felony crime, then you would lose your rights under this.
All right. All those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 120 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 120 has been adopted. Second reading amendment number 2, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 120 and ask for your favorable consideration. Folks, the problem with this bill, from my very learned opinion, is that we open up a problem by putting into Wyoming statute the whole idea of the firearms. Right now, they're not in Wyoming statute, and the argument has been made that we cannot restore a right that we haven't taken away. So I've been in contact with some other attorneys. They prepared an explanation of another avenue, which I alluded to in my testimony yesterday. I ran this by our attorneys here, and they agreed that this is a viable argument, and I just want to share it with you all and get some input on this. So what my amendment does is take the firearm aspect back out of it, but I offer this as an explanation. Please bear with me. Senate File 120 proposes to create a procedure for the restoration of firearm rights of persons convicted of a non-violent felony. In doing so, the bill amends Wyoming Statute 610-106, rights lost by conviction of felony, to add to use or knowingly possess any firearm to those rights lost by a person convicted of a felony. This means that as written, Senate File 120 would extend the loss of firearm rights under Wyoming law from violent felons now to all felons. Currently, under Wyoming Statute 68102, only those who have pled guilty or been convicted of a violent felony or a felony under Wyoming Statute 65204B are prohibited from using or knowingly possessing a firearm, while under federal law, all felons are prohibited from using and possessing firearms. It's been stated that the reason that the bill extends the loss of firearm rights to all felons is that the state cannot return a right that it has not revoked. However, based on federal statutes and case law, which I can cite here, the procedure to restore to nonviolent felons their firearm rights can be accomplished without having to expand firearm prohibitions under Wyoming law. Federal law prohibits all convicted felons from using or possessing firearms. Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. 922 G1 declares it unlawful for any person, quote, who has been convicted in any court of a crime punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year to possess in or affecting commerce any firearm ammunition, unquote. Meaning any person convicted of a felony, whether under state or federal law, loses their firearm rights. In 1986, the Firearms Owners Protection Act created U.S. Code 18 U.S. Code 921A20, which provided a way for states to restore firearm rights of its citizens that would be recognized under federal law. Specifically, 921A20 creates an exception to 922G1 by defending what is not meant by the term, quote, crime punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year. What constitutes a conviction of a crime punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year shall be determined in accordance with the law of the jurisdiction in which the proceedings were held. Any conviction which has been expunged or set aside, for which a person has been pardoned or has a civil rights restored, cannot be considered a conviction for purposes of this chapter unless such pardon, expungement, or restoration of civil rights expressly provides that the person may not ship, transport, possess, or receive firearms. Neither the statute nor the legislative history clarifies which civil rights must be restored to a convicted felon in order to satisfy 921A20. However, the Supreme Court and at least 8 out of 12 United States Courts of Appeal, including the 10th Circuit over Wyoming, have identified 3 core fundamental rights which a person convicted of a felony must possess so as to no longer be considered a prohibited person under 922G1. These are 1, the right to vote, 2, the right to serve on a jury, and 3, the right to hold a public office. These courts have concluded that because 921A20 requires the restoration of civil rights, plural, a person must be restored of all those key civil rights to satisfy the statutory requirements. This does not mean that a person must first lose all of these rights, but if any or all of these rights are lost, they must be restored to satisfy 921A20. Once it's determined that the civil rights of a person have been restored, the next step is to determine whether such restoration of civil rights expressly provides that a convicted felon may not ship, transport, possess, receive firearms. In other words, has the person's firearm rights been fully restored under state law? Several 10th Circuit cases have folded this second step into their civil rights restoration analysis, identifying the right to possess and use firearms as a 4th civil right that a person must possess or have restored in order to satisfy 921A20.
Representative
Yes.
Pendergraph, we typically don't want to read a document that is, like a document from somebody else. We don't go to the mic and read a whole document like that. We
Okay.
try to paraphrase what somebody may
Okay.
have told us or sent to us.
Okay, here's a very quick paraphrase. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a route in order to expunge or to, I don't know the terminology, I'm not an attorney, but there is a route to fix this without introducing more into Wyoming statutes and confounding the matter and making issues for nonviolent felons that are not in Wyoming statutes currently. I would ask you for an aye on this amendment. I will tell you that there is a second amendment coming which works well with this, and I would ask your thoughtful consideration on that as well. For that, I'll
Representative
stand for
Pendergraph,
question.
just in case you didn't move that, because I couldn't,
I believe that I did.
but would you just
Sure.
move it again just for sake of,
Sure. For the record,
yes,
I
please.
move second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 120 and ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. Representative Provenza for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In layman's terms, this amendment guts the bill. All it does is takes out anything that has to do with getting your rights back as an elector, a juror, to hold office, and then to get your gun rights back. If the purpose is to gut the bill and you hate the bill, I encourage you to vote no on third reading. But we're trying to get folks their rights back for a multitude of reasons. What this does is makes it so that essentially the only thing you can do is go through governor's pardon, which currently exists. I mean, it's up to you. Do you want to give folks who have done their time, demonstrated that they're rehabilitated, to get access back to full society, or do we want to keep making people pay for crimes that they've done their time and paid for? Do we want to keep people who have committed nonviolent offenses, maybe when they're young, from getting their gun rights back so they can hunt? That's up to you. This amendment gets rid of that. This amendment guts the bill. So I would encourage a no vote on this. And quite frankly, we've been having this conversation for hours and weeks. There were hours of testimony in committees. And I didn't hear from attorneys coming and saying that there's this other route. And there are other routes. We can expunge people's records. We can just get rid of them. I'm fine with that. We voted on that in the last general session. But I think a lot of people would rather go the route of let's keep their criminal record, but let's give them their rights back. I think this is a lot less of a lift than the other routes. So resist this amendment. Let's go forth and let's do the good work of restoring people's rights so that we can bring them back into society, give them a better chance. Thank you.
Anybody else for their first time? Representative Harrelson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I just, on this amendment, I believe what we're trying to do, or what the concept is that we can work on trying to take out an issue that has been brought to us. And the concept of it is, if you look on page 1 of the bill on line 2, it says, it's in the enacting clause, line 1 says, an act relating to crimes and criminal procedures providing for the loss and restoration. And that's what I guess the heartache that people have is the loss concept. So really, and maybe this is a conversation we need to have, because this is a conversation no one can really give me, is why do we have to remove that which has been removed instead of just restore that's which we would like to restore? That's the conversation. So this amendment removes that loss concept, and then on to page 3, it removes the or to use or knowingly possess any firearm language, which is the concept here is not to create, we're going to take it away, then restore it. It's going to be a deal of, hey, because of your felony, it's been taken away, now we're going to restore. So that's, I think, the question that needs to be brought forward and discussed. And if there's a different avenue that we need to do that, great. That's the beauty of this body and what we're looking at trying to do. Because if we're not careful, we don't want to create more of an issue than we already have. And with that being said, you know, I'm 100%, I'll be in the trenches to make this work, because I'm very, very passionate about this concept. But I also don't want to make an issue potentially where there isn't one. I mean, there's obviously an issue, but I don't want to make a further issue. So if we could have that answered, and I don't know the answer, this is an answer that a group of attorneys came up with, they thought would work, and we ran it through our staff and said, hey, can you see this being an issue, and will this work? And so let's just have that conversation if we can. I think it's a conversation worth having. Thank you.
Representative Crago for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I guess just to maybe back up a little bit, we're talking about 2 different gun rights. We are talking about state gun rights and federal gun rights. And so what this bill is attempting to do is focus on state gun rights. In the amendment proposed here, which I'm against, by the way, let's get that out of the way, takes out the focus on state rights. And what the amendment says is, we, the state of Wyoming, can restore a federal gun right. I would submit to you, we cannot. That is not our duty. But what we can do is restore a state gun right, which is what we're trying to do. But if we don't put in our law that it is lost, we can't give it back. There is nothing to restore because we haven't taken it away. That's the entire purpose of the bill. There's nothing nefarious in here. The intent is to make sure those people who have served their time can own a firearm and can enjoy the Second Amendment like the rest of us. That's the purpose of the bill. This amendment, literally, as the good PhD who's in white today instead of pink, said, guts the bill. There will be no purpose. If you want to vote for this amendment, just vote against the bill on third reading. You have that choice. If you don't believe in what we're trying to do within the bill, just vote against it. But don't gut the bill today with an amendment that tells that where we are trying to give back a right we never took away, which is the federal gun right. That's what this amendment's saying. Hey, feds, we can give back a right that you took away. We cannot. But we can give back the right that we take away. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it so that those people who have lost those rights get them back through a state mechanism rather than a federal one. So on and against the amendment, on and against all the amendments today. Let's keep this bill clean. Let's make sure those folks back home who've done their time get to enjoy the Second Amendment just like the rest of us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Haroldson for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that explanation. And sorry, I'm not trying to be a problem here, but I'm just going to continue to ask some questions. So if the state of Wyoming has never taken those away, then why, I mean, are we at a point in a place where these individuals who have a felony can continue to possess and use firearms because we haven't actually spoken as a state? Question one. Question two, are we at a point in a place where we do this, and since it is having to do with state law, not federal law, we're actually not fixing anything? because the federal side will sit there and say, well, we really don't acknowledge your move as a state and as a legislature. And so is this truly fixing an issue, and how are other states doing it that have gone through this process, I guess would be my question.
All right. Anybody else for their second time before the sponsor? Representative in white's not moving towards the mics. So Representative Pendergraph for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I urge all the consideration you can give to this. I do believe in the purpose of this bill. It has never been my intent to gut the bill. I want to give a provision for people to get their rights back after they have done their time. They've done their straightening up of their life. It's about forgiveness. This is important to me because I know and I'm close to some people that could be affected by this. There is a federal penalty and there is a federal remedy. And we don't simplify the fact by complicating the state statutes. That's the core of what I'm trying to say. Again, I would ask your aye vote on this amendment.
Question having been called, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 120 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 120 has failed. Division having been called, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 2, please rise. Thank you. All those opposed, opposed, please rise. Thank you. Second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 120 failed. Was it 21 to 37? 21-37. Next amendment for our consideration, Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I move second reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 120 and ask for your favorable consideration. So yesterday with the amendment that the good PhD in White brought, we're going to have to do a little bit of a read in here because it changes this page 4, line 16 just a little bit. So let's get our head wrapped around it. So with this, what this amendment does is it just creates kind of a framework of what restoration of rights is. So this states here, and it would be on line 16 after that, Wyoming Statute 610-106A, it would insert, or the right to ship, transport, possess, or receive firearms lost pursuant to any state or local statute, rule, or procedure. So this actually applies very applicably if we do in that prior section, because the amendment we just voted down establishes the rule. And this here is saying, hey, by the way, they get their rights back on these levels. So it would read in as all other rights a person is lost pursuant to Wyoming Statute 6-10-106A, or the right to ship, transport, possess, or receive firearms lost pursuant to any state or local statute, rule, or procedure shall be restored. And then with that amendment we had yesterday, it'll say, shall be restored 5 years after the person has completed their sentence, including applicable periods of probation or parole. So this is just giving in statute what that looks like. Because one of the things you have to understand is it could be a situation someone has the right to own a firearm, but do they have the right to actually transport a firearm? Someone has the right to possess that firearm, but do they have the right to order that firearm to be shipped to them? And so this would just clean that up and give us a framework by what we're actually restoring after that 5-year window. But I've got the lawyer coming to the mic, so we'll see.
Representative Crago for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a question for the bringer. Are you aware of any local statutes, rules, or procedures where you actually lose the right to ship, transport, possess, or receive firearms? Just a question on that, because I'm not aware of any, but if there are some that we're actually trying to address, that might change my mind on the amendment.
Representative Pendergraft for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for the amendment. The legal advice that I received regarding this amendment agrees with it, and that it makes the state statutes more closely aligned with federal statutes, so they read more similarly and draws them into a parallel. So I would ask for your aye vote.
Anybody else for their first time? A lot of people hanging around the mic but not going to the mic. Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Harrelson for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as far as I know, there is not something on the local level that we've seen. But again, it's just a deal where making it where we don't have that opportunity for an overstep on a local level. I don't believe that it would be out of line to put that in there. But really, ultimately, the verbiage that I feel needs to be in there is that ship, transport, possess, or receive firearms. Because that's what is in danger in this moment for these individuals, is once they get their rights back. The worst thing that could happen is we take someone who has made a fatal error in their childhood and have served their time and walked out their parole, and they're standing there in that moment saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to get the restoration of rights back, the voting rights, those civil rights. And with that comes Second Amendment rights. And then for some reason, there is a loophole that we are unaware of, and they get in trouble for something that we granted back to them. That we don't want that. One of the things we've found with this concept is these individuals who are restored, it is a very, very beneficial part of their restoration process is the regaining of their rights. And if we're not careful, if we don't, I just think we need to cover this base well, and I think this is a way we can do that. So I would ask for your favorable consideration. With that, I call for the question.
Question having been called, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 120 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Second reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 120 has failed. Division having been called, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 3, please rise. Thank you. All those opposed, please rise. All right, thank you. Second reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 120 has failed, 28-31. Senate File 120 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Do we have any privileges of the floor? We have 2 of them. Representative Walters, privilege of the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Privilege?
Please.
It's a great pleasure of mine today to recognize 2 of my future hopefully future constituents, and my niece and nephew, Sophie and Andrew Calling, who are here joining and keeping an eye on their uncle, as well as their mother, my younger sister, Lisa. So please welcome them to the house.
Hey! Welcome to the House. We really enjoy Representative Walters. Representative Allred.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to have you draw your attention to the South Gallery. We have here the student government class from Star Valley Middle School, Scott Mill, Lisa Hale, and Mark Johnson. And they learn government in class, and then they come down to observe it. So would you please welcome?
Hey! Welcome to the House, Star Valley High School. That's pretty awesome. Glad you guys are able to join us today. The next bill for our consideration is, more. Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Privilege of the floor, please.
Please.
So this morning, we met with these young warriors from Star Valley, and we really emphasized strongly that they plan on attending the University of Wyoming and resist those temptations from those other states. And so if you guys get a chance to share that with them today, I would encourage you to do so. UW, here we go.
Go Pokes! Yes, yes, don't drift across that border. Be careful. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 127.
Senate File 127, sponsored by Blockchain, Wyoming Stable Token Act, an act relating to trade and commerce.
Senate File 127, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 133.
Senate File 133, sponsored by Senator Schuler, student eligibility and interscholastic sports, an act relating to education.
Senate File 133, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 147.
Senate File 147, sponsored by Senator Anderson, government contracts, labor organization, an act relating to public works and contracts.
We have amendments. Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My apologies. I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File
147.
147 and ask for your favorable consideration. Members, I am not prepared, so I apologize. Yes, so this is the standing committee amendment, essentially redone as a second reading amendment. So I talked to those that spoke up with concerns during the standing committee and the committee of the whole. And those concerns, I think, have been allayed as I read through the Preference Act with them to make sure that what we're really solving here is a conflict between this bill and the Wyoming Preference Act. So I do ask for your favorable consideration just to make sure that these two bills, the bill and our original Preference Act, aren't in conflict. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Larson Lloyd for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was one of those who stood previously and expressed caution. I must confess that I saw my shadow and it scared me, and would think that this is a very good amendment.
Representative Heiner for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also would like to rise in support of this amendment. It makes the bill stronger, and so I urge an aye vote for this amendment.
Sensing your urge to vote, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 147 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 147 has been adopted. Senate File 147, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 151.
Senate File 151, sponsored by Senator Hutchings. Wyoming Prescription Drug Transparency Act, an act relating to the insurance code.
Oh my, we have amendments. Representative Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know everybody hates divisions, and so that's why I brought 5 separate amendments, or I brought 4 of them. All 5 are good. And decreasing kind of order of importance to what I believe are kind of must-haves into the bill to vote your conscience here at the end. So first, I'd like to move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 151. We briefly talked about this on Committee of the Whole. If you look on page 7, this is the definition of maximum allowable cost. And so the issue with this section and why it needs to go back to what we currently have in law that everybody agrees upon, you've probably heard from your cities and your counties and your insurance plans and just about everybody who doesn't like this bill. This is the section, the number 1 kind of cost driver of uncertainty, because we're putting in a new definition. It's from the state of Arkansas. I would say and it's giving you different categories on what maximum allowable cost could be. So the MAC list, MAC, maximum allowable cost list, it's utilized across the board in pharmacology to do reimbursements. And so Arkansas, I believe, is the first state to do this. They had 2,500 complaints on this section. And really the issue at hand is the appeals process. So if you go over to page 11, it's in subsection E, you can appeal any of these decisions with a PBM subject to MAC pricing, and we're changing the definition of MAC pricing. And then if you look on the top of page 12, we're actually allowing all of these kind of transparency things, which I think are good, because you're saying, we can still utilize MAC pricing with similar situated pharmacies. That means in Wyoming, not your mail order pharmacies. And there's a price list out there that they have to be based upon. And so having this many categories, this is what scares all of your plans and your insurers, saying you can basically appeal across the board on multiple different avenues. The number 1, really probably most scary thing, I think, to your health plans and your insurance companies, or B, the average wholesale price. That seems to be across the board in the country, the big fight over reimbursements. And so I would ask you to take the definition back. We had a different definition that we agreed upon in the interim working group. There's still some concerns apparently with that definition, but I believe everybody who perhaps are not your pharmacists right now say it's better leaving it how it is with the current definition we have and we're utilizing and we're basing things on. And again, on a lot of these things, just to get a little bit off where I'm going, in the future, I think we're going this way. The question is, are we ready as a state with our limited capacities in insurance department to be able to handle what other states are seeing? You talk to our counterpart states, sure, more people, but they have 20, 30, 35 people in their departments of insurance to handle and deal with PBM and associated issues. This bill is asking for our first. And so someday I think we're going to revise the definition of the MAC, but I don't think that day is today. I would ask for your favorable consideration on taking the definition back to what everybody is comfortable with, your health payers and your insurance companies and your cities and counties and towns and business community, until we have more agreed upon language to take the next step when it comes to what is MAC and what isn't. Would be happy to try to answer questions.
All right, Representative Strzok for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this will not hurt our bill, and this will be very good. So I am on and for this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Penn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would encourage and I vote on this. Our local pharmacies are in agreement with this.
Wow, okay. All those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 151 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 151 has been adopted. We are now on second reading amendment number 2, Representative Strzok.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I move second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 151 and ask for your favorable consideration. And mostly we're cleaning up some words here and then just making it for our Medicaid and workers' compensation, it says Wyoming Workers' Compensation Division are those claims otherwise prohibited by federal laws. So just really protecting them so it doesn't make an issue for all of them. So thank you. And I am an aye on this amendment.
Representative Penn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would encourage an aye vote on this as well. Once again, supported by the pharmacies who are in need of this bill.
Chairman Zwanitzer for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, I would agree. This is a great amendment. It does clean up the bill, and I hope we just keep going along with where we're going.
Okay, question having been called. All those in favor of second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 151 signify by saying aye. All those opposed. Second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 151 has been adopted. The next amendment for our consideration would be Chairman Zwanitzer on the corrected copy. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you. Move second reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 151. It's a corrected copy because in a previous amendment, I had a little bit of the language from the second reading amendment number 2 on the bottom of, we were trying to change both definitions at once. So the corrected copy we solved that issue in the second amendment we just did. So this is the definition of specialty medication. This is another one of those major areas that, it's the highest priced area in pharmacology, right? And so it's the huge cost. This is what worries everybody when specialty meds are prescribed and who carries them. The definition in the bill was from a certain state. I think we went back, we looked at other states, and we are using kind of the standard insurance definition. It's is what we're changing the definition to of specialty medication. This is what your largest insurers in the country understand and know and feel confident with, and it's my understanding. I believe the association which represents your pharmacies is also okay with this language. So I would encourage your aye vote.
Representative Strzok for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I am on and for this amendment.
Representative Western for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not necessarily on or against, just more curious. Was there any conversation about frequency of diagnosis, like 5 per 100,000, 10 per 100,000, those kind of things, in terms of the frequency of the diagnoses of these rare conditions that require these types of medications?
Representative Rodriguez Williams for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for the amendment, on and for the bill.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Chairman Zwanitzer for your second time.
Quickly, Mr. Speaker, I don't know the answer to the good majority whip's questions. This bill wasn't really discussed in the interim, as many of you know. So I'm kind of trying to get through what I can on the fly, but I believe this is a good amendment. Keep voting aye.
All those in favor of second reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 151 signify by saying aye. All those opposed. Second reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 151 is adopted. Chairman Zwanitzer.
All right, Mr. Speaker, I'd move second reading amendment number 4 to Senate File 151, and I'm just guessing this is where some of the more thorough conversation is going to come in. So let me tell you what we're doing, and this is kind of what I think are some cleanups. And I hate to say on behalf of the PBMs, but I would say on behalf of commerce and industry in general about what we can and can't do as a state when it comes to working in capitalism. So first on page 4, line 2, you'll see that these are the things that PBMs shall not do in the state of Wyoming. And so this new addition on restricted person's choice of network providers for prescription drugs. So there's really 3 kinds of drugs generally in the marketplace. You have your specialty drugs, your brand name drugs, and then your generic drugs. I didn't know exactly what a prescription drug, so we're just modifying that to make sure it says generic and doesn't say brand drugs, and that may cause some issue out there, and if it does on third reading, we can have a further debate on having your network provider prescribe mandated to basically force the network provider to carry brand drugs. But I thought for now, just to keep the statute where we can all generally agree on, and I think everybody, at least outside of the pharmacists agree on, this makes them more comfortable. That next thing on page 4, line 5, this is on conducting spread pricing. So what we're doing is adding basically without consent. So spread pricing is just kind of like what it sounds. When you're a PBM, no different than maybe any other operation, you buy from a manufacturer or a wholesaler, and then you're the middleman in very simplistic terms before you deliver that product to the end user in a retail setting. And in many cases, at least in some cases, that's how they make money. At a large scale level, there's ways around that, and we probably could prohibit it. I think the fear in Wyoming is, as you've heard, there are only 3 kind of PBMs that take about 80% of the market up. And working with some of our local, like let's say our hospitals, our smaller level hospitals, they may not have options to all 3 of these PBMs. And again, PBMs aren't mandated. You don't have to go with one. It's a choice because it saves money. And so what this is attempting to do is just as long as your health benefit plan knows that they're conducting spread pricing and they're okay with it, assuming they're signing the contract, it's allowed. So it's more transparency, but I don't think we're at the point we just outlaw spread pricing altogether, because I'm concerned then you don't have any PBM to even try to operate with. They just say, hey, you're too small, we're not working with you as an independent. And so in some ways, this is an incentive to allow the spread pricing capitalism in the marketplace to have a PBM work with your local kind of larger scales, maybe not your independent pharmacists, but people who deal in medications, mostly hospitals. Page 5, line 1, turning over the page. So this is when it gets really kind of concerning on contracts. So you have to understand PBMs contract with multiple parties, and we're prohibiting a PBM from stopping people to look at contracts. And so this is saying that a pharmacy can go look at a contract of your PBM with another pharmacy. And there's some probably really good reasons for transparency to do that. But the whole point of you contracting with a PBM, you do an independent contract, they don't get to see what you're contracting, you don't get to see what they're contracting. I do think it's important the Department of Insurance have that power, because if there is a complaint, the Department of Insurance can request that contract and say, you're right, there's a major issue here, we need to investigate. But I just think it's against contract law in general to mandate that you have to show your contract in some cases to the competition. After page 5, line 22, so for your retail, your small town rural independent pharmacies that you've probably heard from, they text message me at 11 o'clock at night sometimes. This is the #1 paragraph that is helping your rural independent pharmacists, that if you look on line 20, a person's choice of network provider shall include a retail pharmacy. What that means and what the bill is doing, which I'm not touching, is allowing you to not be forced to only do mail order drugs, right? It's obviously cheaper for everybody, but your independent rural pharmacists probably don't get your drugs by mail. And so what we're doing in this section is saying you got to actually have a retail pharmacy, and there has to be a choice. It has to be in the network. It has to be an option. The question or the issue is you can't, in my mind, price fix that to be the same, because it's just not, right? You can have transparency and accountability, and you can be aware that, hey, it's a little more expensive for me to support my independent rural pharmacy than it is to order my drugs by mail, but I want to support that community business, and that's important to me. So the language we're taking out is this: incentivize using any cost sharing. The way that commerce works, right, is you order by mail, you can get, they're called coupons in this industry, but they're basically like rebates, right? No different than you go to one of our big box stores and you buy so much and you send your rebates in the mail and you get some money back. And so they utilize some of these programs because honestly, it is cheaper to order meds by mail in almost all cases. And so utilizing these coupon programs, that saves your third-party payers and your insurance companies, I don't know, $5-8 million a year. It's a huge part of why one side of this bill against it is screaming out again, is not allowing those incentives to discount your price. And then for finally, that's page 5, line 20. That's the entire amendment. Happy to answer any questions on this amendment.
Representative Penn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would urge a no vote on this in effort to support our local pharmacies. So the point of this bill, 151, is to increase the transparency for our pharmacies to be able to see and understand the contracts, because currently they can't see the contracts that they're beholden to. And so what ends up happening is they do what they think the contract says, they get reimbursed for what the contract says, and then lo and behold, there will be clawbacks. So here a couple months later, after they've received reimbursement for medications that they've dispensed, the PBM will come back and say, oh, we gave you too much money, you owe us back. And there isn't a great way for them to say, well, show me the process and show me the contract. They just have to, they're just at the mercy of the PBMs. So with regards to this, specifically this amendment, all of these things are essential to maintain the transparency within the PBMs and that relationship between the local pharmacists. On line 1, this one prevents, so the word generic is inserted, but this would prevent people from having that opportunity to choose brand name or use brand name. And sometimes it actually does make a difference. So as if I were to prescribe one medication, levothyroxine, that one makes a big difference whether it's brand name or generic. If a patient has been using brand name levothyroxine and they get switched to generic because their PBM requires it, we end up having to change their dosages and do monitoring and labs and things like that for several months. And so it makes a difference whether it's generic or brand name. I can go individually, and I think that there's others that can offer options on this. When I was thinking about this PBM stuff, the thing that came into my mind is another acronym is EBM, and in medicine EBM stands for evidence-based medicine, and that's how medicine works. And so I always want to make sure that I'm practicing based on what does the evidence say. And so there actually is study on PBMs and what do they do. So I actually emailed you a study on evidence-based medicine, and with some of the takeouts from this study. It's like 42 pages long, and so there's some conclusions in there that basically say that PBMs, the transparency is not good. It's just not there. There is a lot of work that needs to be done, and this bill attempts to remedy those situations. So no on this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Strzok for your first time.
Thank you, Speaker. So I will be very short here. I have a couple things I want to say. If they're being transparent, why are they so afraid of this bill? First of all, this will strip all the transparency, everything that we're working for. So again, what is their fear? And also, I would like to ask for, on this amendment, if we could have a recorded vote from 12-4. Thank you, and I am a no on this and a yes on the bill.
Anybody else so duly noted on the 12-4, ayes and noes, does that require seconds? Can't remember. 2 seconds. Slagle, Ward. Representative Stivar for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against this amendment, this is about transparency. I was on the Labor Health Committee last year. Last couple of years, we've heard this. I've heard the pharmacists come in there and talk about the clawbacks. Or a pharmacist here in town that mixes medication. And he mixes it and then only gets paid, he pays exorbitant amount for it and then only gets paid peanuts. So on and against.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? First time, Representative Ottman for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am on and against this amendment. Just a short thing to say that this bill utilizes the best practices language that's already been vetted by multiple stakeholders. We have a nonpartisan staff that's worked very hard to make this bill fit into Wyoming statutes. And so we don't want to cut it up and divide it up and make a mess out of it. It's primarily to help our constituents that are buying medicines to get the best prices, but also to deal within the framework of what is happening with the PBMs and the pharmacies. This bill is only to provide transparency in the workings that go on. So I would ask for a no vote on the amendment and a yes vote on the bill. Thank you.
Representative Henderson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we were on such a good roll there. This amendment continues to help this bill. What's transparent in this bill is that it's going to raise costs for everybody. And I think that this amendment is working to mitigate that by cleaning up the language for the independents as well as the others. Aye on the amendment. We're getting there.
Representative Haroldson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So just some real world numbers, small community, 4,000 people, $100,000 in clawback, 162 prescriptions filled from January 1st to now. In the certain program, they made $1 per prescription and it cost them $8 to administer it. That's what we're dealing with. And if we're not careful, what we're going to do is if we pass this amendment, we're going to go back to where we started, and that is eliminating these private pharmacies from having the ability to have a say in what's going on with these charges. Are we trying to skyrocket our health costs? No, not at all. And I really would even push back on that and say I don't believe that's what we're going to see out of this. But what we are going to see out of this is our local pharmacies be able to keep their doors open. So on and against the amendment.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Chairman Zwanitzer.
Hey, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And so a couple of things I just maybe need to say, because I'm not seeing any of those same concerns. And first, I want everybody to know I'm not working on behalf of the PBMs here. There's two of those lobbyists. They have not approached me. They know I am not with them on these things. I'm here generally working on your third-party payers and your insurance companies because that's working on behalf of all of you, right? Those of you in the private insurance market. So just making sure nobody thinks I'm pushing PBMs. The two things I heard though, when it comes to these contracts, and you should be able to have your pharmacy see the PBM contract, you have to understand on the other side of that contract, the PBM is contracting and it's proprietary, right? No, whatever other business dealing you're dealing with, you have a contract with your wholesaler, your distributor, your manufacturer in some cases. You're getting it at a certain price, level, economy of scale, whatever it might be, and then you're distributing it based on another contract. And so the whole point of this is your pharmacy, which is weird, your end user pharmacy can't get the contract that you, or the PBM in this case, and we're not using PSAOs, and it's not broad across the whole field, which is upsetting to begin with, but that pharmacy doesn't get to force the PBM to share their contracts with other people, right? Up the line, shall we say. So that's why I'm taking out that, in the Department of Insurance, we're still allowing it. If there's a complaint, maybe the PBM will share that contract, maybe they won't. That's interstate commerce. I don't actually know if it totally matters, but I do know you don't get to request from a company how much, the other side of the contract is. A good representative for Fremont County, I don't even think I disagree with her. On page 4, when we talk about brand name drugs, I'm trying to clean up the ambiguity there on line 2, and it says prescription drugs, because there's a concern what that means. Does it mean generic and brand? Because if you read the sentence, it says prescription drugs except for specialty, but it doesn't really specify when you look at the rest of the bill if it's brand and generic or just generic. So to be safe, I put generic, but on third reading, if you want to say that adds brand name drugs, and I can go get some cost estimates from people in the hall and who are listening, I'm sure, to this bill, and we want to make that choice, I think I'm probably going to be okay with that. I just am trying to get rid of the ambiguity with that language in this point. So those are the two things I'm doing in the bill. I think one is basic contract law and the other is reducing ambiguity. So I'm not seeing, I think, what some of the other people are seeing. Again, I would remind you, the best thing for your rural pharmacies that I'm not going after is that they have a choice on page 5, room that B, that they have to be included, and it just can't be mail order only. I mean, that's still probably an $8 to $10 million hit to your private insurers in this state. You know, we have kind of the big 3. I think we have 6 total. And so we're not like, this is not a cost neutral bill at all. And we didn't really go through all of the kind of pushes the pharmacists are doing to move the ball down the field. It's quite extensive. We didn't talk about all the things this bill is doing otherwise. I'm just trying to hold it to where I think it can get to the finish line, and I would like to be able to support it. And I think your third-party payers and your insurance companies, none of them are against your retail independent pharmacies. They're all just trying to make sure they don't have ambiguity in the language, because in the insurance world, ambiguity in language scares people. So I'd ask you to, your favorable aye vote on this amendment as well, and look forward, if there's a discussion on third reading when it comes to brand drugs, to continue that conversation.
The question is, shall second reading amendment number 4 to Senate File 151 be adopted? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Elleman? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Clauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrop? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez-Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Wiley? Yin? Zwanitzer Dan? Zwanitzer Dave? Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? Clauston? Aye to no. Berger? Aye to no. Oakley? Aye to no. Olson? Aye to no. Nemec? Aye to no. Byron? Aye to no. Larson JT? Aye to no. Further changes? O'Hearn? Closing vote? Vote closed. 21 aye, 41 no.
Second reading amendment number 4 to Senate File 151 has been adopted. We are now on what? 4. Yeah. Failed, sorry. Failed, yeah. Excuse me. Second reading amendment number 4 on Senate File 151 has failed. We are now on second reading amendment number 5, Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move second reading amendment number 5, not in the policy realm, but this is in the Section 3 language on what we're doing as a state. And so I've told you previously, this is an issue every state is dealing with when it comes to PBMs. Our federal government is also dealing with it. They've been unable to push some legislation that got very far, and so really every state is struggling, as I think those of us who've been here for a while are aware. And maybe our biggest struggle in Wyoming is we just don't have the capacity, quite honestly, to, in my mind at least, exist in the current sphere where all the other states are, right? We don't even have a position right now in the Department of Insurance to work on PBMs. So you'll see in the bill, we are asking for one position and about, what is it, $100,000. So the question is, should this money come, and we had this debate a little bit on first reading, should this come from special revenue, which in the Department of the Insurance case is it's basically a tax or an assessment on your insurance companies. So your insurance companies are already kind of saying this is, not really what we want to do, not what we agreed to. And now to implement it, to add insult to injury, we're going to say, hey, it actually comes out of your own funding and you have to be assessed more to cover this. And so what I'm hoping to do, A, is move this back to the general fund, saying it's a policy decision of this body and the legislature that if we want to go down this track, which I think we do, and from what I understand from the emails and the calls, we do, and we want to be in the game, we should just pony up and fund it from the general fund. Additionally, you'll see on the amendment, I changed the appropriation from 95,000 to 125. Went and talked to our department that oversees salaries and benefits, and I said, is this a policy position, or do we want someone who's on board at a pharmacy level? So when you look at a yearly salary of a state employee who has a pharmacy qualification, and not saying it has to be a pharmacist, but saying it should be at that kind of a level with salary and benefits, this is the number. It's about 120, but knowing that we have some other bills coming through for employee raises, I thought it's safe to put it at 125. And then you'll see that I just extended the date out for a year, that it doesn't revert until 2025. Not sure what we're doing in the budget session, if this will come before us, if it'll have the intro votes necessary. And so just to be safe, to really work on this for a year or two, which I'm fairly certain your Labor, Health, and Social Service Committee will be, wanted to make sure that funding was in place for a couple of years to be able to do like a contract with an outside entity. There are lots of people who are consulting in this realm, and if we could get some to help Wyoming out, I think that's important. So hopefully we can agree on this, that it should come from the general fund, and it should be at least 2 years of funding to make sure we get this right, because we do need to get it right. And that's been my concern with this bill all along. I know you have your pharmacists lobbying you and telling you this is do or die for them. I appreciate that, but you can't, put premiums and raise everybody else's healthcare costs in your small town to save your independent pharmacy. I don't know if that's correct. So I do think it's important to get it right. I think this helps the bill. I would ask for your favorable aye vote.
Representative Strzok for your first time.
Thank you, Speaker. I would like to, again, this is back to everything else that we defeated once, and I just would ask that we would have a no vote on this amendment. I'm all for the bill and a no on the amendment. Thank you.
Anybody else for their first time? Representative Yin for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe a question of what the special revenue fund, so you said it's from the Department of Insurance. So if we take these $95,000 from the general fund instead, if we take it from the insurance tax instead of the general fund, would that restrict funds that are in that fund for the purpose that they are for? I think I'm for it because without knowing the unintended consequences of taking from that fund that's listed in the bill currently, I think we have a risk of doing some things we didn't want to do.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Chairman Zwanitzer for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't know if 200, 225 is going to force the department to go back and further assess, or if they have it within. It's kind of about right on the margin. But I do think when I would say your insurers don't feel like they had a voice in this bill, to go ahead and say, hey, we might actually even assess you more on top of that is probably not the right policy statement of this body. And so we do have a little more money this year. I do think it's a state prerogative to get this right, and so I do think it's better for us to just say this can come from the general fund.
That was the last time. All right, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 5 to Senate File 151 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Second reading amendment number 5 to Senate File 151 has failed. Division having been called, all those in favor, please rise. Thank you. All those opposed, please rise. Less than 33. Second reading amendment number 5 to Senate File 151 has been adopted. The next amendment, Chairman Zwanitzer.
Hey, thank you for sticking with me, Mr. Speaker and members. Try to make it quick. And so this is probably, what I would say is a legitimate public policy, controversial, much more than the one I brought earlier. So if you'll see on, I would move second reading amendment number 6 to 151. And so this is on page 5. And this is when it comes to reimbursing a pharmacy for services less than the amount that PBM who has an affiliation with their own pharmacy or an affiliated pharmacy can reimburse themselves. I mean, I guess it's just it's a philosophical thought that we talked a little bit about. Does everybody get to make the same? And so remember, you're appealing, right? You don't think you were treated fairly and that the PBM is giving one of their affiliates the cheaper cost of a drug than they're giving you. And sure, we can think about the small rural independent pharmacy, but it could also be your big box chain pharmacy as well. And so that's, I know, some of the rub of this bill is everybody, from what I understand, wants to help the rural independents. I'm not sure how much everybody is, for their chain store pharmacies at the larger level, if that sentiment's still there or not. But here's where it gets interesting, because we're going into contract law again. If you have an affiliate with your business and you can do an economy of scale, you can get them that drug cheaper, is it really fair to price fix the market and their competitor pharmacies in many cases, right? And in some cases, some of these big box chain pharmacies, they don't make any money. They break neutral because it's about getting people in the door to buy other stuff. And I appreciate that. But you really are saying, hey, these people on one side have to get the same reimbursement and the same pay as people on the other side. And that just doesn't sit right with me, I guess, as a free market capitalist. If you want to affiliate and you want to have contracts that say the people who affiliate with your PBM, and I understand there's only 3 PBMs out there, but again, you're not forced to do this. People contract with PBMs because they believe it saves them money, right? The third-party payers, not your pharmacist, but your third-party administrators and the insurance reimbursement, right? It's supposed to, in theory, save money across the board for the plan so you don't get higher health care and insurance premiums, right? That's the whole point of why PBMs exist, or at least should exist, is because they bring costs and prices down. And then sometimes in doing that, they hurt, the ultimate end user of the pharmacy doesn't get reimbursed what the pharmacy thinks it should, which isn't fair, I agree. But it doesn't mean you fix the market that everybody gets the same from the PBM, because it's going to affect how they contract. It's going to affect, their own, forcing someone to say, hey, this competition of a vertically integrated PBM, and I know it's not fair or right, but with capitalism and corporations over the time, they merge, right? And they acquire and they become vertically integrated, which saves them money internally, which hypothetically should bring down costs. Maybe it goes to their investors, right? There's a competition in the marketplace, but I fundamentally think it's unfair to say everybody makes the same amount of money from that PBM and gets reimbursed the same, affiliated or not. So that's the first part on page 5. And then on page 6, when it comes to this, your complaints, right? All of these contracts, we're allowing this new process in law. And again, we haven't talked about all the things this bill is doing that's far beyond what we do now. But if you see in paragraph A there on page 6, we are allowing this new process to investigate and resolve disputes and allow appeals. And so this is what really scares your third-party administrators and your insurance companies, right? Is this language to allow appeals, and you look at this, the bottom language, any other pricing formula for pharmacy and reimbursement. And they don't know what that means. And they're saying now you can appeal across the board. This is the other cost driver. And so when people say, well, maybe your insurance company is just making up a number and that's not really going to be passed on, and your insurance company says, well, we probably are going to pass it on. They don't know, because right now nobody exactly knows how many appeals, how many disputes, and what they can be appealed on. And so some of this is on page 19 when it comes to dispensing fee effective rates, right? There's a fee to dispense, and right now I think it's $12.40 is a number we're using kind of nationwide because that was from the study in 2020. But there's real concern with this kind of broad language to say, hey, what's the worst that can happen? And I think that's what's driving, at least from your insurance companies, saying this could be a heck of a lot of cost pass on. And we solved probably 30 million of that kind of 45 million number they've thrown out of. But this is probably another 2 to 5 million of that is just the fear of the unknown. And so I think at least your insurance companies, if not your third-party payers and everyone else, would appreciate some time to go back, look at this, say, what can be appealed? And again, we have one position in the Department of Insurance who's going to do all these. As I told you, we talked to Arkansas, they had 2,500 appeals last year. If we have 100 complaints for the year for one person in our Department of Insurance, it is going to be overwhelming. And so, and this is not coming from anybody in the hall or anybody else, this is just me reading this bill and saying, how in practice is this going to affect? And this is really worrisome because it's the fear of the unknown. So I would appreciate your aye vote, be happy to answer any questions at the end. I just think it's safer for now to take the language out in both of these sections because it is against capitalism and it's the unknown in those two sections.
Representative Stiff for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to divide the amendment
Of course.
with Division 1 being lines 1 and 2, and Division 2 being the balance, lines 3 through 8.
Let me see the bill real quick. The chair rules that divisible. Representative Stiff, which division would you like to start with?
Division 1.
Division 1, Representative Stiff for your first time.
So on Division 1, it deletes the language on page 5, lines 11 through 18. So on and against Division 1. So the current bill, the way it reads is, it says that a pharmacy benefit manager shall not reimburse a pharmacy for pharmacy services in an amount less than the amount the pharmacy benefit manager reimburses a pharmacy that it owns or is affiliated with. So the situation you have is, let's imagine you've got a pharmacy benefit manager that owns a big box pharmacy, and then you have a mom and pop pharmacy next door, and there are these pharmacy services like, say, dispensing. And so if they, let's imagine for dispensing services, they pay $12 to the one they own themselves, but they only pay $6 to dispense to the mom and pop pharmacy. We can see the problem with that is this isn't capitalism, this isn't competition, this is the opposite of competition. This is market manipulation, because what you're doing is you're putting the mom and pop out of business because you're giving them half as much money as you're giving your own captive pharmacy in this situation. So on and against Division 1.
Representative Western for your first time on Division 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also encourage a no vote on Division 1. Again, if you read through that language, it just simply says, okay, you're going to make money for yourself. mean, you're all under one company that owns the PBM affiliate, all that kind of stuff. It's just, it gets accounted differently, but all goes into your overall balance sheets as profit. And that's fine. The problem therein lies is when you go to somebody else, certainly a small town pharmacy, and say, hey, we're going to reimburse ourselves $15. We're only going to reimburse you $4. So, it's a fairness thing when it comes to these pharmacies. So, on and against.
Representative Banks for your first time on Division 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against Division 1 for the reasons that have been said. That the intention of this bill was to make it so those mom and pops receive the same reimbursement that the people who are controlling those reimbursements for themselves, so that it's an equal playing field. What we're trying to do is accomplish that. So taking out that direct language defeats most of the purpose of the bill. So keeping that in there is important so we can keep, like the good Speaker Pro Tem said, it's the opposite of competition. And we've got to be able to keep that in there for our good pharmacies. That's the biggest part that I can ask you to keep in this bill. So I urge a no vote. Let's keep the equal playing field for those local pharmacies. Thank you.
Representative Larson Lloyd for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know that I'm buying this. And the reason I say that is we talk about healthcare, and for those of us that have had businesses and we go and we shop for employee insurance, health insurance for our employees, you'll come in and the provider, your healthcare, your insurance provider will say, you can go to, if you go to this hospital, this clinic that are within the plan, you can get a higher reimbursement rate or at a cheaper rate. Your deductible out-of-pocket cost is going to be less. If you go to one of those that's outside our plan, you can still go, but you're going to have to pay more. And we kind of accept that as a free market. The insurance companies are working with providers to say, be in our plan, and to be inside our plan, you're going to provide these discounts to us on these procedures and do those sort of things. That's kind of a free market conversation negotiation. So now we're telling these PBMs, I'm small town pharmacy guy, but you're telling these PBMs who have a large in-plan consortium discount pharmacy places or stores that are handling this volume, they're in the plan. You're saying you get it at this discounted rate because you're in either we own you or you're part of the plan. Oh, but to you over here who are outside of the plan, we also have to give that to you as well. We have to give you the same benefit as even though you're not affiliated with us, as we're giving to those who are affiliated with us. Now, I think that the risk there is you don't want rape, pillage, and plunder on the price that they're having to give outside the plan. But I'm struggling with trying to say why this is government telling industry price fixing, price regulation a little bit on these that are outside the plan. And maybe I'm not understanding this, and I think we do want transparency, and I think what we've heard our small pharmacies saying is there's some of these drugs we can't even cover our costs on, and I think that those costs need to be, we have to deal with this, but I don't know that you have to give them the same price exactly that they're given their in-house. I think that's a disadvantage, a manipulation that we're forcing. So I guess I'm in favor of the amendment.
Representative Conrad for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the previous speaker as well, which really articulated my message well. The absurdity of this argument about capitalism is preposterous. So what's next? We support our local tire shop before we go somewhere else to get cheaper tires? I've talked about this before. I'm a proponent of our local pharmacist. Does there need to be transparency, some work? Yeah. But when does this capitalism thing, it blows my mind. We're here about talking about keeping everyone fulfilled, keeping everyone equal, et cetera, so forth. That's what capitalism is about, it's competition. I've told you before, and I'll tell you again. Look at your emails. Look at your Chamber of Commerce's. Look at your county commissioners. Look at all the folks who are opposed to this rule, this proposed law. But most importantly, think about the people that aren't here to represent themselves. You're going to put an additional $26 to $36 charge, fee, tax, whatever you want to call it, upon the backs of them, because that's what's going to equate to them if this bill goes through. $26 to $36 a month is going to be an additional cost to them. Just think about that. How do you answer those guys and gals? You voted for this just to support, so they're going to pay $26 to $36 a month just to support a local pharmacist and take competition out. It's absurd. Thank you.
Representative Conrad, preposterous and absurd, absurd's probably okay, preposterous. We got to be careful upon intent there of people, so just watch our language. Representative Knapp for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I think I can answer that question to our constituents. It was mentioned about a hospital being outside of your insurance area, and that's a great example, because in this instance, your insurance would own the hospital. 6 corporations control 90% of the media in the United States. 20 mega corporations control everything you eat and drink. This isn't about capitalism, it's about price fixing. It's not about what the retail price of that drug is, it's about what the wholesale cost of that drug was. And when manufacturers control the price of that drug to both parties without transparency, that is a problem. That's a problem. In my community, one of our local pharmacists just closed their doors. And it is a shame that they are priced out of the market by the very companies that will one day be a monopoly. It's not going to stop at the local pharmacy. It's not going to stop at the big box. Big box pharmacies are going through the same thing. It will come to a day where you buy your drugs online from one company. That's what we're trying to solve here. Thank you.
Representative Ottman for your first time. Oh, you left. Representative Penn for your first time.
First for a second. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Zwanitzer for your first time.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
On Division 1.
Division 1. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot more going on here that we didn't get into at all. But I want to go a little bit into the weeds because we haven't talked about PSAOs at all. And so these are pharmacy services administrative organizations. So I don't want the conversation to continue to be my small independent pharmacist against this horrible big PBM corporation, attacking mom and pop. There are ways that they have and are fighting back, quote unquote, right? You have things called PSAOs. I think 83% last I looked of your independent pharmacies are in a PSAO. And originally they were supposed to kind of do similar to what a PBM does or negotiate with a PBM on behalf of a large group of independent pharmacies, right? They all get together in a big consortium and then they have greater buying power, economy of scale to push back or negotiate lower prices as well for your independent pharmacy. And keep in mind, and over time, I think it's fair to say with pharma, there's a lot of money and nothing is as clear cut as you think it is, right? You can all say, oh, it's the bad guy's actor A, and you get your poor pharmacy to say, oh, this is a problem on the left side, but everything's good on the right. It's not. It is complicated with 6 different entities from manufacturers to wholesalers to retailers to PSAOs across the board. And so keep in mind, your independent pharmacies, I think 86% of them in Wyoming are part of a PSAO, last I looked. And PSAOs have gone from these kind of negotiators, and now they're doing the admin, the clerical, all the back office stuff for a lot of these pharmacies as well. And so I don't want you to think your independent pharmacies are without means and without buying power to be able to either negotiate directly with a PBM, but almost all the time they're negotiating with a PSAO who's negotiating on their behalf with the PBM. I think that's a concern we haven't talked about. So yes, your independent pharmacies are at risk. I agree with that. But the way to get them on an equal playing field is not to price fix the market, because again, no one is forced to contract with a PBM or PSAO. These are all choices. And if you feel you have to do that, you have to do that, but you can't agree to contract and then say, hey, I get paid the exact same and this is anywhere in Wyoming, I believe, right? I mean, quite honestly, this is probably a violation of interstate commerce in general, because most of these are not being produced in the state and your wholesalers aren't in the state as well. But if they are, the way I read this is any PBM owned anywhere in the state of Wyoming or anywhere in the country, you can say that I want to be paid the same as that entity. It doesn't make sense to me. And I know what they're trying to do, and I don't think it actually in practice would do that because of interstate commerce laws. And so maybe it's a little bit more of a fluffy statement that we hate our PBMs and we're going to push back. And I appreciate that sentiment because we're going to fight. But you don't fight by saying we treat everybody equally. I don't want to use the word socialism, but it gets pretty close to that, saying no matter where in Wyoming, I get paid the exact same as they do for sometimes less work, right? Because you have these other independent PSAOs that are doing most of the work on their behalf. It's not your mom and pop pharmacists that are spending 5 hours a night, trying to figure out how to fight the big drug companies, right? They have other people doing that on their behalf. They get reimbursements from the PSAOs. So keep that in mind.
Anybody else for their first time? Representative Strzok for your first time.
Thank you, Speaker Summers. I would just want to clear up what a PSAOs are, and they're a service organization to help pharmacies contract for numerous services. So I think we're speaking two different things here. So thank you. And
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the bringer? Representative Banks for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we heard the notion that by doing this, we somehow restrict capitalism or fair market competition. And I would submit to this body that what the PBM is doing right now is restricting competition and free market. The ones that are controlling these contracts that are set get to decide. If you go to my own, if I'm a PBM, I get to say, you go to my own, and I reimburse that 100%. But if you go down the street to the little pharmacy downtown, well, that reimbursement's going to be 65%. This is not manipulating any more than the practice that's already going on. This is trying to solve that manipulation across the board. That's what we're trying to do with this Transparency Act. So resist this amendment. I urge a no vote. Thank you.
Anybody else for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Penn for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So on and against Division 1. What this paragraph in the bill does is prohibits the PBM anti-competitive practices. This is the meat of this bill. There have been some, I better not say egregious, I'll say highly questionable practices by these entities that are actually under investigation. Situations such as the PBMs charging a state plan $10,000 for a drug that they could have obtained for $1,000 at a local pharmacy. We must resist this amendment. It's important for Wyoming. It's important for our pharmacies. If we lose our local pharmacies and require our elderly and our sick to drive an hour or more, drive many miles while they're sick and while the roads are bad, what's the cost of that? We know the prices of fuel are high. We need our pharmacies to be in our towns, and it is very important that this language stay in the bill. Thank you.
Representative Larson Lloyd for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the good representative from Coal Country got up a couple of minutes ago and he made some very important points, and I just agree with him 100%. The transparency, the need to allow these small pharmacies to purchase and get reimbursed and to be reimbursed by insurance companies at a price that at least they break even, hopefully to make money. I think all of that is very important. But in this whole scope, in this whole enchilada that we're dealing with here, I'm not sure that this piece, it just seems a little wonky to me that we're saying if, you know, the shirt's just a little too tight. When you have a belly like mine, that's uncomfortable. That we tell these people that you can, whatever cost benefit that you have because of what you own, that you can give your owned or affiliated pharmacies a benefit on, you have to pass to others. Now, again, I completely agree. I think that there has been mischief. I think that there's been some things that have been inappropriate, but let's not let the pendulum swing to the other way, to where we're now saying whatever benefit we have, you have to share with everyone else. I'm not sure that that quite fits. And so, again, I'd be, you know, that's just my opinion, and I like the amendment.
Representative Western for your second time on Division 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the good member of appropriation, if the shirt's too tight, we're happy to get a little bit of a bigger one. The thought is this. Look, it was talked about, the chairman from the capital city said, well, it's the exact same price, is that sticking to the tenets of capitalism. Well, what's the alternative? If we want to bring language that says there's some kind of difference, but caps that, that's one thing. Every company is out to do one thing, and that's make money. And that's good. Every company should make money. But we're doing it to a detriment of the system. It's fundamentally undermining the system. That's where I have concerns. I mean, the company that gives us electricity, turn our lights on, gas to our homes, we tell them exactly what they can charge and tell them exactly how they can recoup those costs. When it comes to the size of this, or the scope of this problem, I don't think giving directive is all that bad a thing. So on and against, thank you.
Chairman Zwanitzer for your second time.
So, Mr. Speaker, thank you. I mean, I think it's a little different when we have rate regulation for electricity with the Public Service Commission, because they get to change that. What we're saying in the statute is it's not changeable, whatever, it's the same across the board. And I mean, I think we all feel for our local independent pharmacies. And so the more I read this and think about how this is going, right, I always go back to the late 80s and 90s where we had one very large, I think the fourth largest corporation in America, big box store, right? That your mom and pop businesses couldn't compete with that coming into the marketplace, and they went under. And it was unfortunate, and it's really unfortunate. But over time, then you had other large big box stores, and they're all corporate and they all compete. And that's just kind of the natural way the market goes up until you get the government to do an antitrust and you knock it back down. And that's just kind of the progression as our society has done for the last 100 years. And so this isn't a whole lot different, right? It's just the way society is moving, that nobody wants to lose their local small town anything. But the question is, how do you keep those going without affecting everybody else? And I think that's the difficulty we're dealing with, especially in rural Wyoming, right? There's only 5 counties in the state that are growing. The rest of the state is not going in the positive direction when it comes to population, and people are aging. And you add those two things together, our state is on a massive collision course of destruction, right? When there's nobody moving here and we're all aging. And maybe that'll keep independent pharmacists going a while longer because older people tend to need more drugs. But eventually you can't stop the free market from working. And what concerns me with this is you're price fixing something that's unstable and it's not really workable, and it's probably litigious as all heck. So again, where this bill is going, I think we all want to go. I'm just saying you can't have one side push a piece of legislation of this magnitude without a whole lot more conversation and a whole lot more people working on it. And maybe it wasn't the best process as interim. And your members, your corporations committee, it was a re-election year. We all didn't give it probably what we should have. And I know there's a lot of angst on behalf of the pharmacists that we weren't more involved and it didn't go further than it did. But coming with a separate bill and just saying, hey, here's how it is, and we're going to have our rural independent pharmacists storm on the door. I'm not saying this isn't the right way to go long term. I'm just saying this year, this is all too much. Let's spend a couple years getting it right.
Division 1.
On Division 1. And I would ask for your aye vote.
All right, thank you. Representative Stith for your second and final time on this Division 1.
Mr. Speaker, so I ask for a no vote on Division 1. Differential pricing by a pharmacy benefit manager in and of itself is not the problem. It's when you're doing it as between a pharmacy that you, as the pharmacy benefit manager yourself, own. And so by voting no, and by keeping the language on page 5, lines 11 through 18, we prevent the abuse of market position. So please vote no on Division 1.
All those in favor of Division 1 on second reading amendment number 6 to Senate File 151 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Division 1 has failed. We are now on Division 2. Representative Stith.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. So I'd vote aye on Division 2. I think the representative from District 43 has a fair point that the language is ambiguous enough that it could be difficult to understand what it's actually going to mean. So aye on Division 2. Thank you.
Question having been Representative Penn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would be against this amendment and encourage you all to do the same. So what this is trying to remove brand name appeal. So currently pharmacies can appeal if they are under reimbursed or have concern about what they get reimbursed for a specific drug. They have the ability to appeal if it's a generic drug and ask for a change in their reimbursement. But they can't do that for brand name drugs. So if they get paid $700 for a brand name drug, and if they paid $700 for a brand name drug and they got reimbursed $500 for that drug, they can't appeal. There's nothing they can do about it. And this language needs to stay in the bill to remedy that situation. No on this division. Thank you.
Representative Western for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More of a question than anything for the chairman from the capital city. The way I read the amendment, we're striking out the language that includes brand effective rates, generic effective rates, et cetera. My question is this: if we're removing that language, are we still giving them the ability to appeal this? Thank you.
Chairman Zwanitzer for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We do have an appeal process in place in general when it comes to just PBMs and pharmacists. And so this is new language. We are far broadening, again, what the current practice is. And I guess I sound like a broken record, but if I could just go through and tell you all of the things that this bill is pushing and has done that we don't do now, because we're just trying to kind of hold it back. And again, I don't think I have a concern. You see in the standing committee amendment, what I withdrew on committee of the whole, it actually had brand and brand effective rates in there. And we voted down that whole amendment. And so when I brought this back, I'm trying to keep it as clean as possible. And if we want to have the conversation tomorrow on brand and brand effective rates, to put those back in, and we can talk specifically about those, because that's not maybe my concern as much as the dispensing fee effective rates and any other pricing formula for pharmacy reimbursement when you have appeals. The fear from your third parties and your insurance companies are, what does that mean? Any other pricing formula, you can kind of appeal anything, and appeals get expensive. And that's really this kind of unknown cost driver that worries, and just worries when we don't know how much this is going to cost to your individual private market insurance plans, because we don't know what the language means. So I'd ask you to vote aye on this division today. If we want to talk about brands on both of the previous conversation on Amendment 4 or not, tomorrow we can certainly do that, and you all can weigh the pros and cons. But for today, I'd at least like the other language taken out, and we can continue the conversation.
Representative Strzok for your first time.
Thank you, Speaker. Again, we need to be a no on this amendment. We need the ability to appeal the brand drugs, or they need the ability to approve the brand drugs and and the PBMs always find ways around the controls all the time. So again, we need the transparency, and this is what this is about. So I would be a no on this and a yes on the bill. Thank you.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the bringer of the division? Representative Stiff, do you want another bite at the apple?
Mr. Speaker, no thanks.
All those in favor of Division 2 on second reading Amendment Number 6 to Senate File 151 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. The chair is in doubt. All those in favor of Division 2, please rise. All those opposed, please rise. Division 2 has passed on a vote of 30 to 29. Senate File 151, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it's so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 152.
Senate File 152, sponsored by Senator Pappas. Occupational therapist, criminal history, an act relating to criminal history records.
Senate File 152, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it's so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 153.
Senate File 153, sponsored by Senator Boner. Election security, an act relating to elections.
Senate File 153, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 164.
Senate File 164, sponsored by Senator Boner. Public improvement contract requirements amendments, an act relating to cities and towns.
Senate File 164, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 167.
Senate File 167, sponsored by Senator Nethercott. Domestic violence protection hearings, remote appearance, an act relating to domestic violence protection.
Senate File 167, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 181.
Senate File 181, sponsored by Senator Schuler. Drug-induced homicide, an act relating to crimes and offenses.
Senate File 181, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House stand in recess until 2 p.m.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. Do we have any committee announcements before we escape? Chairman Newsom.
Chairman, your committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources will meet right now for our interim topics meetings with our friends down the hall in E5. Thank you.
Chairman Strzok.
A joint your joint conference committee, number 1 for House Bill 144 will meet today right after adjournment in room 110.
Thank you. And
Thank
Chairman
you.
Strong, could you come up to the front here for a second too, please? Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Joint Conference Committee number 2 on House Bill 14 will meet now upon this 12:30 recess in room 113 to make determinations on House Bill 14.
Chairman Northrup.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 4, Education, will meet jointly with the members down the hall, and we'll do that tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning in W110.
Chairman
Discuss
Brown.
interim topics.
Thank you. I was hoping he was done, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to let you know again, the Select Committee on School Facilities will be meeting upon adjournment today, and I do have a room for you, W113. We'll be going over interim topics as well as electing leadership. Thank you.
Anybody else? Motion is carried. We stand in recess until 2 p.m.